Okay, here we are live. Hey everyone, thanks for joining in for the Get Equal inaugural Queer Justice Town Hall. We're really excited for this town hall. So just a little bit of framing. We have been doing town halls all across the country in all of our 19 active states, and we've been hearing the priorities and the needs of the front lines. And so we figured that we could do that nationally and sort of scale it up and give us administrative organizers a little time to do town halls. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my folks, starting with Anthony. So Anthony, if you want to go ahead and give yourself an introduction.
Yeah, so my name is Anthony. I go by he, her, any gender pronoun pretty much. I'm genderqueer to identify, and I'm here representing Million Hoodies Movement for Justice. Currently, we have our divestment campaign that we're working on, where we're basically encouraging funders who are basically giving money to manufacturers for assault weapons to not provide them any more funding. So we're doing that by encouraging people to send letters to their offices, to the offices of the manufacturers of these weapons, and calling their representatives to encourage them to no longer fund these companies. And we also have our Power Summit that we just had this past spring, where we basically provided strategies and provided them with techniques in which they could use, college students and high school students, to basically address the issue of gun violence and criminal justice in their respective communities. And we also have another initiative where we're trying to expand more of our national reach to promote basically the awareness of gun violence amongst college campuses. So getting college students involved in this and providing them with techniques to be able to do this effectively in their communities. So that's currently what we're working on as an organization at Million Hoodies. So.
Great, thanks Anthony. Cool, so I'm going to hand it right over to Carlos.
Hey folks, my name is Carlos. I am the program coordinator for the Queer Undocumented Immigrant Project, which is a program of United We Dream. My preferred gender pronoun is him, her, ella, él, or girl. I also, currently what we're doing with United We Dream, we have two current campaigns. We have the No More Delays campaign, which is pretty much pressuring President Obama to grant administrative relief to our families. We have 11.5 million undocumented people in this country, many of them who identify as queer, and we want to make sure that the president, under his executive power, grants as much relief as he can so that the pain of family separation doesn't continue. And the reason why it's very important for us is because every day 1,100 families continue to be separated. And specifically for QUIP, there's 267,000 undocumented LGBTQ folks who live in fear of detention and deportations every day. So we have also launched the Bold, Broad, Inclusive campaign along with some LGBT partners, and making sure that when the president, for the president to act now, and when he does, to make sure that he doesn't leave LGBT undocumented people behind, because as we all know, we tend to be most of the times marginalized and criminalized at higher levels, so we want to make sure that we are too included, and our voices are present at the table. So yeah, that's us for QUIP and United We Dream.
Awesome, thank you Carlos. I'm going to hand it right over to Charno.
Hi, my name is Cherno Biko, and I'm one of the founders of Trans Women of Color Ohio. We do so much work, but really our mission is to uplift the narratives, lived experiences, and leadership of trans women of color. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today, talking about queer justice, because we need some of that. Laverne Cox always reminds us of Cornel West saying, "Justice is what love looks like out in public," and trans women of color need a little bit of justice. We need some love today. I'm here representing my girls. Like, my accountability is always to them, so I really want to have the tough conversations, which we have every day, and I want to have here about prison abolition, about immigration, about the violence that we face, and so I'm ready to go.
Yes, thank you, Cho. I'm going to keep it moving and hand it right to Diana. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana, or Daya. I am so honored and privileged to be part of the panelists tonight. I'm really humbled. A little bit about myself. I'm a Vietnamese queer woman of color, poet, organizer, daughter of refugees. In my daytime, and actually, it's all the time really in the work, I'm actually a campaign associate at NACASEC, which focuses on immigrant rights. And so we've been doing it for about 20 years now, and I have had the experience thus far being out there in the field through the Fast for Families campaign, of which I joined in solidarity fasting for 8 days for immigration reform, and it's something that's really close to my heart as my story is intertwined with immigration, and I now work on a campaign full time. We recently just wrapped up an Act Bold Obama campaign, of which we mobilize and galvanize our community to really make those demands to the president on administrative relief, and we're going to continue to do so. But tonight I'm actually representing myself, or the API community, which stands for the Asian American Pacific Islander Community. And I invite folks to use the hashtag #NotYourMinority as at the bottom, and it stems from a group of folks who were part of a contingent on August 28th and getting arrested, and we all had shirts that says "Not Your Minority" to really challenge the idea of Asian American Pacific Islanders in this country and our stake in immigration. Not just that, but across other issues too. And my background about myself, I've had over a decade of experience working in the AAPI community on issues like economic justice, LGBT rights, youth organizing, worker rights. So I come with this with an intersection of experience, but also just really open to having a conversation around allyship, building stronger solidarity, and how do we move our movement forward through a queer lens. So I'm thankful of being here.
Yes. Thank you, Diana. Whoa, I'm feeling really humbled and really, really excited for this panel. So thank you, everybody, for getting on. Tim was on. I think he's not anymore. Whenever he gets back on, we will definitely give him a chance to introduce himself. Tim will be on representing the Dream Defenders. As I said, my name is Kieran. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the National Field Coordinator for GetEQUAL. So this panel and this town hall is the beginning of a series of town halls that we will be doing virtually, and I am so freaking excited. So we're really, really lucky to be able to start this series off with a panel about criminalization and the policing of LGBTQ people. And so with that, I'm just going to hop right into it because I'm so excited to hear what you guys have to say. So the very, very first question is, queer and trans people of color are often left behind in both the LGBTQ and POC movements. We're often told that we're being divisive or to wait our turn in both spaces. And so my question is to all of you folks is, how can we hold the LGBTQ organizations accountable to anti-racist commitments? And how can we hold POC organizations accountable to anti-homophobic and anti-transphobic commitments?
So, I mean, I think for us, for the Queer and Undocumented Immigrant Project, as many of you might know, we work specifically with folks that identify as undocumented and LGBT, which traditionally for such a long time, both the LGBT movement and the immigrant rights movement were looked in a very parallel format. And for us, I mean, I remember growing up, I remember spaces where I would come in as the immigrant rights activist and speak about immigration. But when they would ask me to, when I wanted to express my queer identity, there was never a safe space for me to speak of such identity, and it was never appropriate, or I think even for me internally, I never saw it as relevant. And it wasn't until organizations started to really talk about the intersectionality of identities and the much-needed space for them, and that was the creation of the Queer and Undocumented Immigrant Project, because we noticed that there was within the Dreamer movement, the leaders that were many of the leaders that were leading it were queer. They were not addressing those issues of being queer. So for us, we made it intentional of creating a space with a program that, one, educated the immigrant, for us specifically the immigrant rights community, about our identities, about our struggles, and about our needs. Which also, and we did it as well for the LGBT community, making sure that they knew of our undocumented issues, of our struggles, and the barriers that we were being faced with because of the lack of status. So I mean, I think for us it has been the one thing has been to create spaces within our own community for them to feel safe, to empower themselves, and then holding organizations accountable by expressing our needs. And we've been it's a evolving mentality every time we learn how to do more and bigger and better things, but we're still going. So
Definitely. Definitely. I think being aware of our edges and being in constant I think being in constant coalition with each other is like constantly being like aware of each other and being like working with each other. I totally respect that. Thank you, Carlos. Other folks?
I agree with Carlos too. I think a lot of it is just showing up, and somebody has to work within these systems if they want to change them. Now, I'm not saying that that's everybody's job, right? Like, it's not my job to work within the system. I think I'm more interested in how we can kind of create our own to handle some of the issues that we're facing with. And and like you said, a lot of times that's met with hostility. People are saying like we're being divisive and stuff, but really, we when we handle it with an intersectional lens, oftentimes that looks like queer and trans people of color in leadership positions. If these organizations aren't hiring queer and trans people of color to serve in leadership positions, then a lot of that work can't get done. You can't just tell me to fill out a survey and I might win $100 gift card. No, I need to be at the table when we're planning how to go about these rallies and how to go about these marches, or even when we're coming up with messaging, because a lot of times that's how we get left out. And so it's twofold. We have to show up and have a seat at the table, but we also have to be able to come together on our own and have that or a space where we can be brave and do the work for ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think authenticity in this work is so key, and I think maintaining visibility in a way that's not tokenizing and is like actually honoring our power and building from a place of power is absolutely key.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jano. Other folks?
Yeah, just the one word that kept popping up when Sharna was talking was inclusivity, right? So exactly how we're going to be able to be a part of this movement is by literally being at the table with policymakers and with people in positions of power who can get our foot into the door as people of color, as queer people of color, trans folks, everybody. I think that is the number one single most important thing is inclusivity, and how we practice it is going to change community by community, because the same way we approach it here in Chicago is going to be the same way you approach, like gun violence, for example, here in Chicago isn't going to be the same way you approach gun violence in New York. So it's definitely kind of getting to the grassroots and understanding who is being a part of this movement and trying to get them involved as much as possible to be able to create an effective system of change really in the entire country. So.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I think that we're not going to see the changes that we want until we see our communities reflected in being those change makers. I think that that's totally, completely correct. I'm going to take a minute and let Tim introduce himself because it looks like he got internet again. Hey, Tim. So go ahead and take 2 minutes and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim. I represent the Dream Defenders. I live in Florida. Right now, I've been working with the Dream Defenders, and we've been
Hey, Tim,
organizing.
could you speak into your microphone? Sorry, I'm having a really
Oh,
hard time hearing you.
is that better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, it was my earphones. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
But my name is Tim. I am representing the Dream Defenders. I organized here in Florida. We've been doing like a lot of work. Dream Defenders has been doing like a lot of work around. My bad. Around the prison industrial complex and criminalization of people of color. So we just wrapped up, well, it's actually still ongoing, but like the major parts of our Block is Ours program that we had going on, which was freedom schools that we had all across the state of Florida. We just kind of wrapped those up, but we've been planning to do a lot more just to kind of end the criminalization and the just like our people are being killed out here, like people of color, like just to end the slaughter and like the criminalization of our people. I feel like as a person of color and also as a queer person, I could bring a lot to the space on both ends. So I'm here to do that in any way that I can.
Great, thank you, Tim. And I think it's great that you guys are coming off of Freedom Schools because this virtual town hall is definitely to learn about our edges and to see how we can hold each other accountable across all of our different movements, orgs, everything. So thank you. So I want to go ahead and wrap up this first question, but definitely give folks time to answer. So basically, we're talking about how we can hold LGBTQ movements accountable to anti-racism, as well as holding POC-led organizations and movements accountable to anti-homophobia and anti-transphobia. So Diana or Tim, if y'all want to sound off real quickly, so we can also move forward.
I mean, I think what Francis said so far is on point about where we need to move forward from, and I think also at this point in time, in building those safe spaces, it's really addressing the phobias, right? All of which transphobia, homophobia, queerphobia, and really having those honest conversations within our organizations or within our coalitions to really overcome all of that. Because I think a lot of what prevents us from moving forward is being shy or nervous or hesitant about calling folks out because we're in the progressive community. And I think that it should be a healthy practice to go to that space where we can have really honest conversations and come to a point of understanding and how we can intersect our movements better. It's no secret that in these organizations there is anti-racism, there is other phobias, and it comes out and it really comes out in different ways, and we need to be able to address that because how are we going to have an honest movement for social change? We can't be honest with ourselves.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think coupling that with what Cherno said too, it sounds like a lot of this has to come from feeling. So like acknowledging where people are hurting us and not holding the entire thing on ourselves to teach everybody, but definitely acknowledging that if we're going to step into power with folks, we have to step into power with them and make them see our power. So I really appreciate that. Thanks, Diana. I'm totally stuttering. Tim, do you have anything that you want to sound off on this question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say like one thing for me that I feel like is very important is like I understand like meeting at the intersections and things of that nature. I do feel like that's very important. As far as accountability, I found it really hard to try to find solutions or like ways that we could hold like these types of organizations accountable. But one thing that I did feel like is very important is that like I know we just spoke, well, Karen and Diana, you all just spoke about like showing them our power. I feel like one way that we can show them our power is just by simply like creating things that are for us. So not necessarily like trying to make these organizations like change like what they're doing or coming to see the light on the things that we're trying to bring to them, but also creating organizations that may be just for people of color that are LGBTQ or what have you. I feel like there's a lot of power in that. I feel like we have been waiting for a long time for our voices to be heard and to be included, and I just feel like at some point that we should, in my opinion, start creating organizations that are for us. And we could still possibly work with other organizations, but I do feel like that is much needed.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that honesty and that realness, and I think all of us are shaking.
We're like, let's do it.
No, definitely do that. No, I completely feel that. I think we're talking about opportunities. We're talking about building community, and like ultimately like that means a safe space, and if that means a space away from like this like phobia, this like hardness, this like healing work, like okay, fine, cool, let's go.
Right.
I completely agree with that. Thanks, Tim.
No
so with that, I'm going to move on to the next question. So when we use the word criminalization, and we mean a lot of things. Of course, we mean police brutality and abuse, and of course, we mean the slaughter of queer and trans people of color. But we also mean a lack of action from police that should keep our community safe. Oftentimes, our community, the LGBTQ community, feels the brunt of police inaction. To keep our community safe, and we also mean a systems of law that disproportionately set up queer and trans people, especially queer and trans people of color, to be charged and dumped into the criminal justice system. What do you think LGBTQ and POC organizations can and should be doing to combat all of these forms of criminalization? It's a big question.
Right. I think the first thing that comes to my mind really is empowerment, just the word empowerment in and of itself. It manifests itself in many different ways, but I think just definitely the exposure piece, just being inclusive, and then also just getting as many young people involved as possible is super important. I think just through my personal experience alone, and definitely through what Million Hoodies does, is encourages and creates that. It doesn't necessarily kind of provide the seed for the empowerment. It really just kind of helps flourish it in people. I think, especially queer people of color, trans folks, we want to be recognized, and we have it in ourselves to be recognized in some way, shape, or form. We just haven't had the opportunity or had the right spaces in which we can express ourselves in a certain type of way. So I really just think it's all about empowering young people. It's about empowering people in our community, addressing the issues that are confronting us right in front of us, and just yeah, I mean, just definitely empowerment, but it definitely means many things, not just through workshops, not just through virtual town hall meetings. It has to be grassroots, it has to be educational. It manifests itself in many different ways, but definitely the key word there is empowerment and providing that for all young people, especially queer people of color. So.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think leadership models and empowerment models or whatever that fit queer people of color that aren't the like cookie cutter nonprofit industrial complex thing is like totally necessary. So I really thanks, Anthony. Other folks.
I think for me, specifically, the word criminalization has been used so loosely that it just has, demonized anybody that has been charged with some sort of something, whether it's a misdemeanor, whatever it is that has happened. And we haven't realized that, I mean, we as people of color have realized that we are the ones that are being highly targeted. And anybody that has somehow have had like a history with the police automatically becomes a criminal for us. But we need to realize that, for example, for our families that are undocumented, a broken tail light means that they become a criminal because they don't have documentation to drive with the driver's licenses. Being, undocumented and being trans and walking down the street and being pulled over and then being asked for their ID, police officers are most likely gonna, say that, what are you doing? Are you doing sex work, or whatever they might want to criminalize them with, because the current police institutions have targeted and intentionally criminalized our community, and for some reason we haven't addressed that issue, saying that the criminalization has been used so loosely that we need to first understand the individual that he is a victim of the system, and that nowhere he's a criminal. And I think I think as mentioned before, like we need to empower folks to understand really the word of define the word of criminality to be inclusive of understanding how it impacts people of color specifically. With regards to immigration status, so being mindful of our disparities and of our disparities that are very intentional by the system that is in place that criminalizes our community and oppresses our community, and then moving forward from that people shouldn't fall into that for various reasons, and people should be proven free until we should always find a solution instead of like right away jumping into that people are criminals.
Yeah, totally. I totally like destigmatizing what criminalized means and definitely like honoring like the spectrum of criminalization and how, like a broken tail light can actually like mean the destruction of a family, but on another hand, it could like if you're a cute girl, it might be like, oh, just go home and do something about it, So I totally get that. Thanks, Carlos. Other folks?
There are a lot of people doing work around criminalization, and so I'm not like coming from an academic place when I talk about criminalization. I'm coming from a very personal place as someone who has been criminalized, who has been walking in a store and the manager called the police and said that a man dressed as a woman was shoplifting, and so I've been banned permanently from that store. And I put out my phone, and so that's on my YouTube channel. It's on Cherno Biko. I titled it Stop and Frisk, the transgender version or something like that. So you can go check that out. But there are people doing this work. So I must shout out Breakout in New Orleans, my girls down there, and I must shout out the Audre Lorde Project in New York, and their Safe Outside the System. They're doing great work around criminalization. Here's the thing. I think about when we talk about criminalization, all of the thousands of black men and people of color who are sitting in prison for either using or selling marijuana. And then I think about all of the white men who are now getting rich off of marijuana in Colorado and in Washington and in California. And so when we talk about criminalization, I think we have to be real and honest about what's going on here. There was a young woman, her name was Monica Jones. She was in Phoenix, Arizona. And she's a trans activist and a sex worker rights activist, and also a student at Arizona State University for social work. And they do these things. I believe it was was it Carlos talking about prostitution and sex work.
Sex work.
They do these things, right? And so it's called Project Rose, and it's the church, the Catholic Church, working with social workers, working with the police. And so the police can pick you up because there's a law called manifestation of prostitution, which basically is a profiling law. You don't have to be soliciting. You don't have to be doing anything. You can just be dressed like or be black like or have the body of
Yes,
a
Black
prostitute
Light.
in terms of the eyes of the police or their perspective. And so she was picked up and taken to this church where she refused to plead guilty that she was in prostitution. So then they took her to jail. But if you do plead guilty, then it just goes on your record. You can get off with probation, but you have to enter into this 12-week class with the Catholic Church and these social workers, right? So these are the kind of things that we're navigating in this country when we talk about criminalization. And I think to combat that, we're going to have to start thinking of ways to really kind of look out for each other on a more intentional level.
Yeah. I'm really feel this whole like spectrum of criminalization and how different bodies and different experiences are deemed worthy of being criminalized. And I yes, thank you, Shano. And I also hear the showing up for each other and really having each other's back. I totally feel that. Thank you.
Yeah, I love this video. There's this video going around on Facebook. I don't know what country it's in or anything, but some guy at like a soccer match ran out onto the field with like a banner, and the police started like abusing him. You should have seen the way those community members came down from the stands. It was like 6 police officers, right, and thousands of fans. Those police officers got out of there so fast, and we really have strength in numbers. So looking out for each other in ways like that, like get involved. If you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I completely agree. Thanks, Sherna. Other folks?
So for just coming from myself, I came to this work because of criminalization. I think one of the things that I recognized early on is that we are living in a police state, and if Ferguson didn't wake folks up, then I don't know what folks have been doing, but we are living in a police state where more and more folks are being policed in so many different ways, and it's not just law enforcement, but within the schools, within any institution, and it's happening and it's rampant. And I think that one of the things that I know and I'm very aware of is that it's not exclusive to one community, though it is rampant against Black and brown folks. And for myself, I came to this work because my growing up experience really resembles that of Black and brown folks, but being Asian American Pacific Islander and being associated with the model minority myth is not something that people widely recognize or can associate with. But my brother and all the young Southeast Asian brothers that I grew up with have been criminalized by local law enforcement in the area that I grew up in, which is a low-income, mostly immigrant community, and a lot of which is within the schools. There weren't a lot of resources to support students, and and what produced this school to prison pipeline is just that. We have teachers who don't look like us. We have school administrations who don't look like us and who won't give us time of day to understand our backgrounds and all of the trials and tribulations and the amount of oppression that we face and is systemic. And I think that to move forward in that and really address those issues, we need organizations who, whether or not work on criminalization or not, but can't just be on organizations that solely focus on criminalization to address those issues. They need to be really out there in the forefront to make those statements when when incidents do happen, and to really go out there and be intentional about that, because we can't just sit on the sidelines. And I also speak for and in terms of with the Asian Pacific Islander community, it happens, but it's not often talked about or something that we are slowly getting to a place where we can find those intersections and be able to move that forward. And I think I continue to do that on a daily basis and trying to fight these connections. And I think it's something that I do ask of the folks of color in our communities who are working on criminalization to really come to a place where we can have better conversations about that, and how do we strengthen those allyships, and how do we find better ways in which allies don't take up the space but can really actively be a part of that, so that they can include it into their work, or which whatever issues that they're working on. To help move us forward, because I think at the end of the day we just see it so often, and folks don't recognize it because they deem it as normal, and that's not acceptable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, it's like the spectrum your whole life, and what it's going to take, because like the spectrum is so big and it governs so many pieces of our lives. Like, what is it going to take to topple that? And certainly, I mean, if it's a spectrum, then it's going to take a spectrum of tactics. But we have to be mindful of what implications that have. Totally. Thanks, Diana.
For me, I feel like two of the things that I heard that really stuck out to me that I feel like are important, is intent, and also like Cherno said, like we all like have each other's backs. I think that is very important. I feel like in organizations and in movements that are composed of like primarily people of color, I think that like we have to be we have to I could say that we could train them and things like that on like what it means to be a person of color and LGBTQ living in America, and tell them how our lives matter. But I also feel like if you really do care about your people as a whole, then show some like intent to want to learn and to try to help your people. I feel like unity is very important. I think that in every way, like we should be like bringing our issues to the forefront and letting folks know that these are the things that we do care about, and regardless of whether or not it's to the Attorney General's office, to to our state capitals, to Washington D.C., or even to our EDs and our organizations. Like, we have to go to them and we have to talk to them and we have to let them know that these are things that are important. These are things that are affecting our community in a very, very great way as people of color and LGBTQ, and that if we do not take a stance on these issues and really fight against these issues, and make sure that these are as much of a priority as a lot of these other issues, then that unity and that power that we're trying to seek, I don't feel like it's going to happen. So I do think that that's really, really, really important. I think that intent does say a lot, because you do have some organizations out there who are like, yes, we do care about this and the third, and that goes for everybody or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, you do have those organizations that say they care, but why do I have to be the one that constantly comes to you and brings up the issue of me being a person of color and LGBTQ in America? Like, if you really do care about your people in your organization, and you care about, their issues and what they're going through as well, then you should have some type of system set up where you're doing your research on what's affecting them, and that your organization is out there making sure that their voices are being heard, and that these systems that are oppressing them and these things that are put in place to keep them down and oppressed are being eradicated. So I feel like a lot of it is us teaching and training them, but a lot of it is like, y'all just need to stop being like so freaking ignorant and pick something, like read an article or come to us and talk to us about what's going on and really start acting on it. Because you can know a lot of stuff, but if you're not applying that knowledge, it's not really power. Like, knowledge isn't power. Applied knowledge is power. Like, take action on what you know, what you're hearing from your people, and let's do something about it.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
I wanted to say
Go on to
something
the next question with that.
real quick. I wanted to add to after hearing Oyoan, I think the one thing that comes to mind is organizationally, it becomes very easy to throw people under the bus, because you want to be looked at, kind of going back to what Diana was saying, like, this model of an organization, of a person, and very often it becomes like, who's a good person and who's not. And I think the question that we always need to bring back, even when it does become to like someone doing sex work and someone selling weed or selling pot, but the question is that they're doing that to survive, so it becomes a survival crime because of the disparities that people have placed on us. And when we're out there as organizations, even folks that might not have their constituency or their base or their members are not those specific impacted individuals, but always being mindful that people do survival crimes more often than not for the need of surviving than because they are out there to, like, whatever they might want, whatever might happen. But most of our community of people of color do it to survive. So for me, it's making sure that if one of my transgender sister has to do sex work, nowhere near are we shaming her because she has to do that to survive, because no other place
That's right.
job. So I think we need to address the issue of like survival crimes and more, stop demonizing the word criminalization.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I just want to say a little piece. Like with Dee, like when we were doing our freedom schools this summer and we were going out and we were canvassing and talking to folks, like we made it clear that, you know, we wanted everybody. Like there were no exceptions. Like we, like even the people that people overlook, like the sex workers and the addicts and the poor and the disabled. We went out there and we talked to all of them because we understand that they are part of our community, and without them we will not see any progress whatsoever. And I feel like that has to be the mind state of like all these organizations. And like Carlos was saying, like it doesn't matter like what you think of what that person does. Like they're doing what they have to do to survive. And I feel like that's very important that we look at them in a way of they're still human beings. They are still important. Their life does matter, and they are something that they are like somebody and some people that we really need in order for our movement to grow and move further. So I do feel like that's a great point.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all. Anybody else, or I'm gonna move on to the next question. Cool. Thanks, y'all. Y'all killing it. Okay, cool. So because there are no overreaching federal civil rights protections on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, queer and trans people are disproportionately vulnerable to economic insecurity, as we were talking about. Sometimes these must resort to survival crimes, exactly as y'all were saying. Like y'all knew I was going to ask this, in order to provide for themselves, which places them directly in the path of abusive over-policing. So what can we do to fight back against this prisoner pipeline that locks up so many folks in our community? So, you know, just sort of like building off of what y'all were talking about with economic disparities, about multiple things that are broken, whether it's respectability politics, whether it's the economic system, whether it's our housing system, it's multiple things that are broken, right? So it's like, what can we do to specifically combat these things that are keeping us down and that are shoveling us into this criminalization system?
Awesome. Okay, come on. This is what we can do.
Okay.
So I think about like the when the police are doing like DUI checkpoints, they release that information. Like we're gonna have a checkpoint here this weekend. So it's somebody's job to work with the police as a LGBT liaison or a people of color liaison, whatever you got to do, but find out when they're going to be handling these things, and so we can get the word out and help the girls. I met an officer in Washington, D.C. This summer when I was there for Lobby Day, and she works with the community leaders for trans women of color in DC and tells them, you know, let the girls know, don't stand on this corner this weekend because there's going to be extra patrol. Don't be in this hotel this weekend because they're going to be coming and knocking on the door doing things. And so we need to find people who are in the system who are willing to take those risks and help us in that way. And then we need to be better about, like I said, looking out for each other. If you know that I think they used to release pigeons or doves or something to let you know the police was coming. But it's getting to the point now where if we don't start doing that, we're looking at. I hear a person of color or a black man is killed by the police every 28 hours, and so I believe that was released in the aftermath of Mike Brown. But I mean, that number can go up, right? Like it can be every 24 hours. So finding ways to work outside of the system, not calling the police on each other. If we can, not calling the police on each other, and handling things like we used to know how. Get some elders involved. We need to be a little more intergenerational when we come together as a community, and people need to play their roles. If you do subscribe to gender roles, I want you to take your place and help out in the best way that you can. And if you don't, then that's even better because we can kind of bridge those gaps and rise above those binaries and look at it from a different perspective, right?
Yeah, I think the knowledge is definitely present in our community. Like, we know how to do this stuff. We do know how to survive. It's just a matter of how do we survive the system. Other folks?
I think for us, for Quip, I'll show you an example of what does that mean to us in a micro level. For us, stopping the policing of our people specifically does impact the DUIs because constantly DUIs in a lot of areas are now they're specifically targeted in people of color communities where they feel like they're gonna find people without documentation and then they'll put them out. But I think the first thing that one of the policies that is specifically impacting our communities is secure communities, which pretty much allows the partnership of local police to work with immigration enforcement and anybody that comes in contact with them, whether it's because of a broken taillight of a DUI checkpoint and they don't have a driver's licenses, they automatically get into the system and then they put an ICE hold and then they deport them. So what our communities have been doing locally is that they've been passing ordinances that prevents police working with immigration, and that's one of like this big, for us the issue of policing is very difficult, but even more when we're risking deportation. So one of our first steps is ending secure communities for us at a local level because it becomes more powerful because folks can see an immediate result of community power, of people power, passing very specific policies that they can end their criminalization or their deportations. And I think also just making sure that your local elected officials, local enforcement, we just need to tell people that they hold power in numbers. Going back to what Sherna was mentioning, that people hold power in numbers, and that when they come together, they can change policies. I mean, they are the policy makers at the end of the day, and we need to stop giving power to elected officials because it's the people that hold the power. And usually the dreamer tactic is go into their freaking offices and be like, we're not leaving until this gets done. And usually they're terrified. So I think this is the power that actually I'm right next door to my mother and a couple other women that are going to be throwing it down pretty soon to continue doing what we do. And that's what we need to show our community. Like this, you can have an impact as simple as going to your city council and having a sitting there and be like, you need to stop targeting our communities because this is no longer acceptable and our communities are fighting back. But yeah, I mean, there's a various tactics. That's something that Quip has been doing in partnership with, in just the broader immigration rights movement and the Dreamer movement. So giving power to the people and making sure that they're the ones that are the policymakers of our community.
Yeah, hell yeah. Fuck, I'm like already. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's go.
Like, where are we going to go?
Yeah, all right, I'm in. Cool. Anybody else? All right. I have plenty of.
I'm at.
Oh, can I go? Oh, never mind.
Yeah,
Somebody else about to go?
I was just gonna tell a quick story, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, like, I feel like I know I'm saying like a lot of like forced bias stuff, but I do feel like parallel institutions are like a good idea. I know that we talk about that a lot. Dream Defenders has been doing like a lot of work around school to prison pipeline, but I also feel like having the people of the communities like go to their school board and like demand a revision of their curriculum and create a curriculum that is going to help fit the LGBTQ students that are there to protect them and to ensure that they can receive their education in a way and that they are not being criminalized within their schools, that they are receiving the education and the things that they need in order to grow and flourish in those spaces. I feel like we have to also set up like those healing spaces and that same type of protection and watch over our children of LGBTQ and all of our other people within our communities and in our own neighborhoods. Like maybe setting up programs where if there is some type of issues where kids are being bullied after school or are being criminalized and bullied within school, that the people from the community can go to those schools and have those problems eradicated. I think that also goes back to that power in numbers that Cherno and Carlos were just referring to. So like people really getting together and understanding that LGBTQ folks are not invisible, that they do exist and that their lives do matter, and that we have to start really putting on for our people in order for them to feel like they can really be the people that they want to be, and that they have the right to be within this nation and definitely in school.
Yes. Damn, I'm like so ready to follow all of y'all into battle. I'm like, okay, like, oh yeah. Thank you, Jen. That's actually a really good segue into the next question. I don't know if that's okay, or did you want to?
Nope.
Cool. So bullying actually has become like a super big buzzword with schools, and they're making these like zero tolerance policies. They're justifying them with this idea that they're against bullying, but actually, they're like really short-sighted, and that is contributing, as we know, zero tolerance policies are contributing directly to school-to-prison pipelines, specifically for queer trans folks and people of color, especially queer trans people of color. So I mean, and that's just one example, right? So like, how can we fight back against these short-sighted policies and help ensure that we are specifically breaking down the school-to-prison pipeline? So as Tim said, you know what I mean? It's like yes, we need to take that people power and go specifically to where those decisions are being made, right? The school board, the core curriculum, like really get people in there. And I think that that's right. As Diana was saying earlier, we don't have teachers that look like us. Like I've never been taught by a teacher that looked like me. You know what I mean? And so, So how can or what are things that folks can do when they're seeing these short-sighted policies? How can they combat them when they're actually being prepackaged and like given to us as being like, no, we're trying to help bullying, and it's like, well, what? No, you're not. You're putting it in the prison pipeline. Like we see you.
Right. I mean, I think I always associate bullying in the classroom, especially, it really goes down to the teachers and the kind of space that they facilitate in their classrooms. I feel like bullying that happens directly in the classroom, that's very explicit, if the teacher doesn't call it out, they're essentially condoning that kind of behavior. So there definitely needs to be a lot more accountability to school administrators, like principals and teachers especially. So I think definitely through professional development kind of workshops and educating them about really not, I mean, I don't want to use the cliche term diversity, but the different types of identities of people nowadays that are more explicit, that are more visible, and kind of like, I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly how to say it in particular, but I know I worked with an organization here last summer in Chicago called the Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health, and they are a huge advocate and proponent of sending young people and giving them the education and the knowledge to educate their communities, and in particular in the school system and in their actual, where their homes are actually located. So you have young people educating their teachers, their administrators about like what LGBTQ, like the different types of identities that are involved, what like genderqueer means, and in particular like sexual health education, comprehensive sexual health education. So I really do think just by giving them that knowledge and providing that information for them and having organizations do that kind of outreach to the administrative staff will hopefully make a huge impact on the explicit types of bullying that happen in the classroom. But then you also have cyberbullying, which is also another concern, which is kind of, it's a very gray area whether or not school administrators should be involved in cyberbullying. So, I mean, that's also another thing that it's really hard to address and tackle. But nonetheless, it affects queer people of color. But in the classroom, I definitely do think that administrators should hold a lot more accountability when it comes to preventing bullying, and by really just educating them on just kind of what all these different identities look like, or not look like, but that their representation is there, even though it may not be explicit. And so if somebody does call somebody out and say a very vulgar term or anything like that, they need to be called out on that, because if the teacher doesn't call them out on it, they're essentially condoning that behavior, and then that promotes an idea for students that they can also do that kind of behavior in other areas, not just inside of the classroom, but outside of the classroom.
Right, definitely. Yeah, we want to talk about like community power and like people power. Like students are people. Like a classroom should be a community. Like there should be power there. I love this idea of like of young people educating the educator on like what they need and like what their identities need and what that space should give to them. Yes, as somebody who did not have a good time in institutionalized education, I wish that I would have had that opportunity. Thanks,
Me
Anthony.
too. Me too.
Right. Anybody else?
I think it's about calling out the administrations and schools on the lack of resources. I think that they resort to these zero-tolerance policies because they don't have, and I think that there's not a lot of thought and intentionality of really trying to really address these issues and really transform the ways of which students, those who are being bullied and those around of students who are being bullied to feel safe, to come to understanding. And I think that that's also part of education that's really valuable. But you see budget cuts across the country, and you see public school systems being attacked or just being undermined by policies like at a federal level, No Child Left Behind, and so forth. And I think that when you look at the heart of it, it's really about looking at education. It's not just within textbooks or within tests, but also looking within students and their identities. And in my experience in working with young people back in the day in Los Angeles, I was fortunate enough to lead a high school access project called Hope. That's based out of UCLA, and it wasn't solely focused on LGBT youth, but because I had openly identified as queer, a lot of youth came to me and really wanting a safe space to talk about how they're bullied, how they're being policed within the classrooms by their peers, by their teachers, about the way they dressed, or who they are and how they represented themselves and feeling unsafe. And there's also the increased presence on campus where it just made them feel like even more, although law enforcement presence on campus with the administration in their eyes as a way to facilitate the kind of safe space, but it just made them feel more endangered in their own skin. And you talk about the impacts of mental health, and the immediate thing that the administration will do is just send them to a psychiatric ward or a psychological help, or send them to an institution of which to prevent suicide. But even then, it's also prison for the youth. And I had been fortunate to come across in my lifetime two transgender API youth who have really had to face that head on, and all those are ways in which we're talking about now, right? Which the school to prison pipeline, or lack of resources, or these zero-tolerance policies, and lack of resources and understanding from teachers who don't look like us. And I think that one of the ways that we can do that is to address as a community is to really look at these schools and really pinpoint what exactly is making our young people feel unsafe, what's making them feel alienated, what's making them feel like they have to resort to harmful practices to find an escape or to run away from home, and really find a safe space. And I think that there are organizations who are out there, but there's not enough of it for these young people when you look across the country. And I think we have to find new innovative ways to tear down these policies that are really harmful to our young people.
Definitely. Thanks, Diana. I also wanted to lift up something, take my facilitator hat off for a second. I think the reason why we talk about zero-tolerance policies, and like specifically what Carlos was talking about with like the demonization of the idea of criminal and all these different things, and if we're going to talk about homelessness or economic insecurity, a lot of that comes from like a moral high ground, or like this like morality of like heterosexuality or something, which is nonsense. And but we're seeing that written into law, and we've been seeing that written into law. It was written into law in Mississippi, and it was enacted in July 1st. And so like people want to say like, oh, like high school will end, or all these things will end, like you'll get past it, but it's like, no, like this is actually being written into law. So like the same reasons why queer teens and queer people of color are being kicked out of homes or being abused for this like morality is being written into laws that are supposed to be anti-discriminatory. And so I think having zero-tolerance policies with laws that are supposed to be anti-discriminatory and being like, no, like you are literally writing in discrimination, and like that's zero tolerance with that nonsense. Cool. Do other folks have thoughts about how we can do this?
So when I think about the zero tolerance and who is specific, it impacts everyone, and I think the most vulnerable folks that I think of are, within our constituency, within the undocumented and queer community, is you know, those undocumented children, immigrant children that are working in the farms and work every day and, you know, come really late to school sometimes, and or sometimes decide not to come to school and they start getting truancy charges. And, you know, this little pipeline that slowly starts pushing the kid away from school and out into, I think, Timothy's talking. Sorry. Tim, I think you're on mute.
Tim, you're definitely on mute.
You're definitely on mute.
Oh, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. I
Go,
was.
you go, Tim. Go, Tim. Go for it.
Oh, no. I was just saying, like, I agree with what you were saying. I just wanted to like address like the thing about bullying is like I feel like going back to the safety of kids. I know that with me growing up, it was like I was scared to even tell my parents or my teachers or anyone that I thought could help me or that had the power to help me about my sexuality, let alone trying to tell them that I've been bullied because of it. So like that fear that keeps kids from speaking out and getting the assistance that they need is something that needs to be tackled, whether that is through like parenting at home or whether that's through, because I also feel like a lot of times we talk about parenting and we talk about teachers or whatever, but what like I always remember the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child, and I strongly feel that like the community should be very heavily involved with the lives of the kids that are growing up there. As far as like teaching is concerned, I learned this at our last wildfire training in New York. Shout out wildfire. Um, about how important it is as a facilitator or a teacher to know the children that you will be teaching and to know how to be a great teacher for them, and not necessarily to shove a whole bunch of knowledge down their throat, but to get them to think and to be able to use their experiences to teach you something so that you could be a better teacher. So I do understand like what some folks were saying about the students telling the teachers what they need, but I also feel like it's more so the teacher's duty to figure out what these kids need, because I don't think that when these kids are going, like when you have like kids that are heterosexual or what have you, that go into these schools, like they have to explain to their teachers what they need, or things of that nature. So I feel like it's up to, once again, invisibility is a huge thing within schools. Like a lot of people want to try to act like that LGBT kids do not exist, and when they do see them, they try to shut them up, they try to suspend them, they try to put them in all these different types of programs and make them feel inferior, and I don't feel like that's fair. I don't feel like that's right. So I do think that when it comes to like bullying and things like that, we really do need to try to help the kids understand that there's nothing to be afraid of. You don't have to fear who you are, and that there are people in place that will fight for them to ensure that they are safe and that they're not being bullied. Because a lot of these kids want to speak up and they won't help, but they're afraid. They're terrified to tell anybody. And that's real. Like, I know that, I mean, pretty sure that all of us have been there at that point where we felt like we wanted help, but we were scared to reach out to somebody because we didn't know how they'll react for us just being who we are. So I think that that's a really, really, really big thing. We all know that that zero tolerance thing and that whole thing, that little campaign they tried to run to stop bullying was BS. We all know that. So it's like now we have to, now we, as the people that understand that, have to start putting things in place or putting ourselves in place for our children to reach out to us and feel like they can be empowered and that they can feel safe and they don't got to worry about no damn bullies. And that's my tea.
No, that's right. No, I mean, it's like it doesn't just get better. Like we have to make it better.
Yes, definitely. I was like, it doesn't get better for us. We are the ones that make it better because we empower ourselves, we go out there, we educate ourselves, because those teachers and classes are not educating us on what we really deserve and what we really
exactly.
For. So, for example, when they're teaching me about George W. Bush, I'm like, homeboy doesn't even look like me. But if you're teaching me about Zapata, if you're teaching me about like other people that look like me and identify like me, I'm going to be in class fresh and early because they're talking about what I am so searching about.
And even in college, that's that issue too. So
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Just to add on to Timothy's point too, I kind of want to give a shout out to somebody on Twitter, Dylan, who, when I made a comment about professional development for teachers and students, he mentioned how there needs to be some sort of workshops and development kind of exercises for LGBTQ colleagues too. And I think that's something that's really important. That I don't feel like especially in high school, it's not promoted for teachers who are LGBTQ, especially if they're people of color, to be comfortable and kind of express that they are of a certain identity, which then therefore prevents a lot of students from thinking that, oh, they can, come up to a particular teacher and say that they're LGBTQ and all this stuff. I mean, I had a teacher in high school personally who I didn't find out till like after I came out that he was also gay too, but he would always kind of give me these like subtle hints of like, kind of wanting to help me come out in high school. But for me, it didn't really click right away. And so I don't know if that was because he didn't actually, or if he was actually not, like, he was the president, he was the one who facilitated an LGBT group for the students at the school. But I think that was just kind of his way to kind of discreetly be like, hey, I know, like, you may be gay or whatever, and like I'm here to help you out through that process. But the fact that he couldn't explicitly say it to me, I think that's something that also speaks volume about kind of the way that just high school administrators are kind of told to do certain things, to teach in certain ways, but that don't necessarily they don't cater to the particular needs of the individual students. So just kind of wanted to like add that additional piece to it. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Thanks, Anthony. So I know that we're over time, and we could literally talk about this all night, and we're just scratching the surface. But I did have one more topic that I would like to talk about. I hope that y'all will stay with me. I'm just gonna go ahead and ask the question. If y'all gotta jump, you gotta jump. That's fine. I get it. People of color time? I don't know. All right. So currently there are 32 states and 2 U.S. territories that explicitly criminalize HIV exposure through sex, restrictions through bodily fluids, including saliva. In these cases, neither proof of the intent to transmit HIV nor actual transmission is required, leading to both the continued stigmatization of positive statuses and the increased criminalization of queer people. So what can we collectively do to fight back against these laws, these like super short-sighted laws, and against the continued stigmatization of folks who are HIV positive? Totally switching gears.
That's tied to a whole bunch of stuff.
Yes.
Yes, this is a really big topic, and again, I'm not coming from an academic place here. HIV hits really close to home for me. It's my community especially was hit really hard when this virus came down. And to me, it's not just like, I feel like there was a lot of trauma, especially because in terms of, you talked about the nonprofit industrial complex and the prison industrial complex, but there's also a medical industrial complex that we need to raise awareness around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about like in the last century when they were testing syphilis on black men and women in Tuskegee.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are still like, and even with the Ebola virus, like there's still something in the back of my head that says, this system is not broken. Like this was intentional. This was placed here for a reason. Again, it's the genocide of people of color.
That's right.
Okay, now I said all of that to say, 3 years ago, I fell in love with this boy, and like we were like going cool, right? And I'm falling deeper and deeper in love every day. And about 6 months into it, he comes out to me as HIV positive. And like the fear in his eyes, like when he told me that he had something to tell me, and I was like, what could it be? Like I'm thinking the world is about to end. And he was so afraid because of the stigma that's attached to it. And because of these laws that we have criminalizing HIV, people are using that as a form of revenge. Like, you may not even have been a partner with them, but they'll just turn you into the police or try to report you for transmitting HIV. They may or may not have had sex with you, but because these laws create space for them to do that, people with HIV are being further criminalized and oppressed. Mm-hmm. And honestly speaking, back then, I didn't know as much as I do now, and so my world was crushed. Honestly speaking, I didn't know how we were going to have sex. I didn't know how we were going to continue. I didn't know how to tell my mom. Like, there was a lot of stigma on my part, so we can't forget about the education aspect of HIV. We still have to be diligent about HIV education and HIV prevention and awareness. I think we kind of got on this like this sense of now that there's medicine, you can live longer with HIV, so it's not that serious, and we can, kind of take a back seat. And now it's risen again, and so trans women of color and Black gay men and people of color uh, are rising statistically in terms of new infection rates. And then we can't also forget about the part that with all these people are getting infected, then if they already have it, then we have to get these folks into treatment, right? We have to make sure that people have access to the medication that they need. We have to make sure that people can go to the doctor. We have to make sure that people know that they can't get fired if they have to miss work because of the complications related to their illness. And so there's a lot. That's why I said this topic is so big, but there's a lot that needs to happen to bring us forward into this. And again, stay in the love. Like, do the work.
That's right.
My biggest thing with HIV criminalization laws is that it provides this false sense of security that by criminalizing people with HIV, it will protect them from HIV itself, and it doesn't. So going back to Sherman's point, it really goes down to the education piece, which is absolutely necessary and huge. I think the whole idea of this like treatment as treatment is effective, but treatment is also encompassing education, it's encompassing testing, it's encompassing resources, and not just treatment in and of itself. And even before treatment, the whole idea, the stigmatization behind getting tested for HIV, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, people automatically assume that by getting tested for HIV, they're going to become positive. So I can't even begin to tell you the amount of people who have come up to me saying, like, I'm afraid to go get tested because I'm afraid it's going to come out positive. And I'm like, what happens if you are tested negative? And then they're like, okay, why just move on? So it's just like there's such a huge fear behind just getting tested. And studies have shown again and again that getting tested early on, before treatment and anything, I mean, is the most effective solution to reducing the numbers of HIV infection rates. So it's like, how do we go about through all these complex systems and criminalization? It's really just by having people at the grassroots explaining to people that getting tested doesn't mean you're going to be positive. Getting tested has literally very little harm to no harm. Actually, I don't think it has any harm, really. And there are sites where you can get it tested for free, where you don't have to pay. And yeah, I mean, I just think just the whole idea of criminalizing people with HIV, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you criminalize people for giving you the flu, for giving you the cold, but yet you would criminalize somebody for giving you HIV, quote unquote, and because it's considered just like death sentence kind of thing, and it's not. It's not for a lot of people, at least nowadays, in comparison to when it first started in the 80s. And that mentality of HIV as a death sentence still exists to this day in many, many ways, and especially amongst communities of color. But it doesn't just exist within our own community; it exists everywhere in society. And decriminalization laws prove that stereotype and that stigmatization still exists.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. And definitely thank you, Sharna.
I agree. I totally agree with that. And I also feel like it's blatant that criminalizing folks that have HIV is just another way of throwing people of color in jail. Like we just talked about, like, we know that most of the folks that are affected and that are infected with HIV are people of color and LGBTQ folks. So that's another way for the government and people in power to oppress us and throw us in jail. It ties right back into the prison industrial complex, which I feel like a lot of this is like, and it goes back to like we all been saying the whole time. Like with HIV, I feel like it's something that's not being talked about, and it needs to be talked about. It needs to be thrown out there, not so that people. I mean, we want to eradicate that fear of like that. Oh, as soon as you get HIV, it's a death sentence, because it's not. And also just let people know that there's no need to fear anyone that has it. And like, I feel like we have to just embrace folks, and we have to know that this is just another way that they're trying to find ways to throw us in jail and kill us. For me, in my opinion, I feel like that's what it is. Because I mean, like, why would you want to criminalize someone for a disease that don't make no sense to me? Like, I don't feel like that don't make sense to anybody else either. Like, I understand like that, I understand what is going on, but I'm just saying, like, for me, it just seems like a setup for people of color. Like, because you know that most of the people that are affected by HIV are people of color and they're LGBTQ. So like, to me, I feel like it's BS. I feel like talking about it more, and like we were talking about, setting up clinics and having and educating folks on what it means to be HIV positive and things like that to prevent it and eventually eradicate it is number one. I feel like that's very important, so that our people can live long lives, and also just educating our people on what it means to be HIV positive and letting them know that it's nothing to be afraid of, it's nothing to be ashamed of, and don't try to act funny or don't be ignorant towards people because they have that. Like and that's just all I feel like. That's my personal opinion. I feel like that's what it is.
Mm. Thank you, Tim. Okay, cool. So thank you so much, Tim. Do other folks have thoughts? Can I go ahead and wrap it up?
For us, I think within HIV, the biggest thing with the criminalization of it, I think that's there for us within immigration, how it impacts folks that are seeking political asylum. It's actually a retro effect because folks that have HIV are most likely to get political asylum granted in the country. So somehow they have incentivized the being positive with HIV within our LGBTQ community because it's I know I'm like what the heck. But it's also a good thing because folks that do have HIV will get granted asylum and they will get the healthcare needed, the healthcare access that they deserve. So it's a very fine line, and we haven't yet found out how do we address the issue. But we know that there's an issue just in making anybody that has HIV will get their political asylum granted. So that we haven't found out about it. We need to figure out how do we address that issue. And I think the other question about like HIV and HIV testing, specifically for undocumented queer folks and trans folks. Is that there is no health care access to such means of even testing. Our undocumented community have been excluded from the medical field, from the medical access so often that real talk, and people of color, real talk, only go to like the doctors or when we're dying. When my mom says te está matando, then you'll be fine because people die at the hospitals. And this mentality that because we've been excluded from the table so often that we have not prioritize our health, and we need to, making sure that every community has access to it, including undocumented communities, including folks down at the border in border towns that can go up to San Antonio to get their, reproductive, health care that they need for women and lesbians and trans women. So we just need to make sure that healthcare access is the #1 priority, and with that, decriminalizing HIV because. It's just decriminalizing it and also stopping the stigmatization of it and making it, figuring out how we come out with like it's a very difficult topic, and I mean I think we just need to find how we make it better for our own people instead of being told what's better for us.
Yes. Good. Thank you, Carlos. Cool. All right, folks. Well, it's 15 after the hour. Thank you so much for staying on, and thank you for showing up at all. I'm feeling so lifted and so humbled to know all of you and get to continue to learn from all of you. Trust and believe I will be stalking all of you for the next week. It's like and being like, oh, yeah, Diana, what's up?
Before we close out, just a big shout out to Kieran and the folks at GetEQUAL for
Yes.
Hey, it's real tough. It's real tough. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really lucky that we get to do this kind of stuff and that y'all will show up for us. I feel like I spend most of my time like loving all of you, and now I get to like be with all of you. Cool. So now I'm gonna plug GetEQUAL for a minute. If folks heard things that they're like super interested in or they were inspired by, we are interested in working on all this stuff. We're interested. The reason why we're doing these town halls is to sharpen our analysis and to make sure that we're held accountable to show up for folks, to show up for our coalition partners and our community members and our family across issue lines and across identity lines, and to like build these structures, build community, and actually show up and power for each other the way that we were talking about. Like, we're saying that these things, you need to like show power to the people. You need to actually take action. Well, like this shit actually lives outside of a hashtag.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
So I just wanted to put out there that we are going to have a call, an open community call next Tuesday to wrap up this town hall, to put some of this stuff into action, to think about how GetEQUAL can actually start to work on criminalization in an authentic way, in a way that fits our community, to start to put in anti-racism into our or all of these different things. So definitely be looking out for that. I will be blasting out the phone number for that. It'll be at 8 p.m. Next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, and I am so freaking excited. So thanks, y'all. Thank you again, and yay.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Love on love.